An elderly woman lived quietly in her old house, surrounded by memories and the illusion that her children still loved her. But one phone call shattered everything. She realized they were only waiting for her inheritance. Heartbroken, she packed a small suitcase and vanished into the night. When she collapsed on a lonely country road, a poor family took her in and showed her a kind of love she'd forgotten existed. Yet when she leaves, their lives, and her children's, will never be the same again. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. The house on Maple Road had been Eleanor Simmons' home for 32 years. It sat at the end of a gravel driveway, surrounded by oak trees that had grown taller than the roof, their branches scraping against the gutters when the wind picked up. The porch steps creaked in the same spot they always had, right in the middle, and the screen door still stuck a little when you tried to close it. Inside, everything was exactly where it had been since William died. His reading glasses on the side table, the afghan she'd knitted draped over his favorite chair, even the coffee mug he'd used that last morning, still sat in the cabinet, unwashed, waiting. Eleanor was 74 now, her hair completely white, pulled back in a loose bun that never quite stayed in place. Her hands shook a little when she poured her tea, not from fear or sadness, just age making itself known. She moved slowly through the rooms each day, touching things, the doorframe where they'd marked the children's heights, the kitchen counter where she'd taught Clara how to roll pie crust, the window where she'd watched Michael ride his bike for the first time without training wheels. The walls held photographs in mismatched frames, Michael at his college graduation, Clara on her wedding day, family vacations to the lake where they'd rented the same cabin every summer for 10 years. In every picture Eleanor stood in the background, or to the side, smiling, her hand on someone's shoulder, holding someone's coat, always there but never quite the center. She'd never minded that. Being there was enough. She'd been sick that winter. A flu that settled deep in her chest and wouldn't let go. For 3 weeks she'd barely left her bed, surviving on soup and crackers, listening to the house settle around her in the dark. The doctor had come once, an old friend of William's, and told her to rest, to drink fluids, to call if it got worse. She hadn't called, she'd just waited it out, alone, watching the ceiling and counting the water stains that looked like clouds. But she was better now, or getting there. Strong enough to sit in her chair by the window, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, watching the daffodils push up through the cold ground. Spring was coming. She could feel it in the air, in the way the light changed, in the sound of birds that had been silent all winter. It was a Thursday morning in early March when the phone rang. Eleanor's heart lifted when she saw the name on the screen, Michael, her son, her firstborn. The boy who used to climb into her lap when he had nightmares, who used to bring her dandelions from the yard and call them flowers. "Michael, honey," she said, pulling the phone to her ear. Her voice came out softer than she meant it to, almost breathless. "Hey, Ma." His voice was clear, businesslike, the voice he used at work. "How're you feeling? I heard you were pretty sick." She smiled, even though he couldn't see it. Her whole face lit up. "Oh, I'm much better now, just a little tired, you know. But the doctor says I'm on the mend." "That's good, that's real good." There was a pause, the sound of papers rustling, maybe a keyboard clicking. "You eating okay? Taking your medicine?" "Yes, yes, all of it." She pressed her hand against her chest, feeling the warmth spread there like sunlight. He was worried about her. Her boy was worried. "I had some oatmeal this morning, and I made a little chicken last night. Nothing fancy, but it was nice. I even made that stuffing you used to like, the one with the sage." "Good, you need to keep your strength up." They talked for a few more minutes. She told him about the neighbor's dog, that wouldn't stop barking, about the daffodils, about how the mailman had started leaving packages on the porch instead of by the door, because he was afraid she'd slip on the ice. Michael made the right sounds. Yeah, that's funny." And she felt herself relax into the conversation, into the familiar rhythm of mother and son, the dance they'd done 1,000 times before. "The Johnsons next door had their grandkids visiting last week," she continued, her voice brightening. "3 little ones, running all over the yard. It reminded me of when you and Clara were small. Remember how you used to build those forts in the backyard? Yeah, Ma, I remember. His voice was distracted now, distant. Listen, I gotta run soon, but I just wanted to check in. Of course, I'm so glad you called, sweetheart. It means the world to me. Well, I just wanted to check in, he said. I'll call you again soon, okay? Okay, sweetheart. I love you too, Ma. She lowered the phone, still smiling, her heart full in a way it hadn't been in weeks. He cared, he remembered. She wasn't forgotten. Her finger moved toward the red button to end the call, but just before she pressed it, she heard his voice again, not directed at her this time. Different, sharper, colder. Her thumb froze. She's still okay. Michael's voice came through tinny but clear, like he'd turned away from the phone but hadn't quite hung up. Damn, I thought she'd be weaker by now. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Her hand tightened around the phone. Yeah, listen, he continued, and she could hear footsteps now, the sound of a door closing, voices in the background. We'll have to wait a little longer to sell that land, but make sure I'm the one calling her more often, okay? Don't want her getting any ideas about splitting it with Clara. You know how sentimental she gets. A woman's laugh, his wife Sarah, came through faintly, distant but clear enough. You're terrible. I'm practical, Michael said, and she could hear the shrug in his voice, the dismissiveness. She's not going to live forever. Might as well make sure things are set up right. Then the line went dead. Eleanor sat perfectly still. The phone slipped from her hand onto her lap, but she didn't move to pick it up. She stared straight ahead at the wall, at the family portrait hanging above the mantel. Michael and Clara as children, their faces bright and unmarked by time, their eyes full of trust and innocence. William standing behind them, his hand on her shoulder, protective and proud, and herself, smiling like she had everything she'd ever wanted, like the world made sense, and love was simple and permanent. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her chest rose and fell, slow and steady, but inside something was collapsing, piece by piece, like a house built on sand finally meeting the tide. The words echoed in her head, over and over, each repetition driving deeper like a nail. I thought she'd be weaker by now. Don't want her getting any ideas about splitting it with Clara. She's not going to live forever. She didn't cry. Not yet. The tears were there, somewhere deep, but they hadn't reached the surface. What she felt was bigger than sadness. It was a kind of hollow astonishment, the feeling of reaching for something in the dark, and finding nothing there. The feeling of discovering that the ground you'd been standing on for 74 years had never been solid at all. He doesn't love me, she thought. He's waiting for me to die. The room felt colder suddenly. The light coming through the window seemed dimmer, like someone had turned down the sun. She pulled the shawl tighter around her shoulders, and looked down at the phone in her lap, the screen dark now, blank, reflecting nothing. She thought about all the times she'd defended him. When William had said Michael was too focused on money, too ambitious, too hard, he's just trying to make his way in the world, she'd said. He's just trying to provide for his family. When Clara had complained that Michael never called, never visited, never seemed to care, Eleanor had made excuses. He's busy. He has so much on his plate. You know how demanding his job is. She'd spent years building a story in her mind, a narrative where her children loved her, where the sacrifices she'd made mattered, where being a good mother was enough. And now that story was crumbling, and she didn't know what to put in its place. She sat there for a long time, maybe an hour, maybe more. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, the only sound in the house. Outside, a bird called, sharp and insistent. A car drove by, its engine fading into the distance. The mailman came and went, his footsteps heavy on the porch. But inside, there was only silence, and the slow quiet crumbling of everything she'd believed. When the phone rang again, she flinched like she'd been slapped. Clara's name lit up the screen, bright and cheerful, mocking. Eleanor stared at it. Her finger hovered over the button. Part of her wanted to let it ring, to sit in the silence a little longer, to not have to hear another voice she loved say something that would break her further. But old habits are strong. Old hopes die hard, she answered. Hi, Mama. Clara's voice was warm, cheerful, like sunshine breaking through clouds. I was just thinking about you. How are you feeling? Eleanor swallowed. Her throat felt tight, like there was a stone lodged there. "I'm doing better, sweetheart. Thank you for asking." "Good, good. I was worried about you. You know how these things can linger at your age. You have to be so careful, at your age." The words landed like a small stone in still water, rippling outward. Eleanor closed her eyes. "I'm fine really," she said, forcing brightness into her voice, the cheerfulness she'd perfected over decades of pretending everything was fine. "Just taking it easy, reading a little. The flowers are starting to come up. The daffodils are early this year. That's wonderful." Clara paused, and Eleanor could hear something shift in her voice, a carefulness, a calculation. "Listen, Mama, I've been thinking, you're all alone out there, and I worry about you. What if something happened? What if you fell, or got sick again, and no one was there? What if you couldn't get to the phone?" "I'm careful, Clara. I have my phone. The neighbors check on me. Mrs. Johnson comes by twice a week." I know, but still." Another pause, longer this time. "What if you came to live with me, here in the city? I've got that extra room, the one we've been using for storage, and I could clean it out, make it really nice. I could really take care of you. Properly, you know. You'd have someone around all the time." Eleanor's chest tightened. She opened her eyes and looked at the wall, at the faded wallpaper William had hung 30 years ago, at the small nail hole where a picture used to hang. "Oh honey, I don't know if I could leave the house. Your father and I know it's hard," Clara said quickly, her voice taking on that reasonable tone, the one she used when she was trying to convince someone of something they didn't want. "But Mama, you could sell the land, the house too. With that money, we could get you set up so nicely here. I could even get a bigger place, something with a real guest suite, just for you, with your own bathroom and everything. You'd never have to worry about anything. And think about it, you'd be close to doctors, hospitals, everything you might need." The words hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor's hand gripped the armrest of her chair, her knuckles white, her nails digging into the worn fabric. "The land is worth quite a bit now, you know," Clara continued, her voice casual but pointed. "Property values have gone up so much in your area, you could get a really good price. And honestly, Mama, what do you need all that space for? It's just sitting there. Just sitting there. Like it was nothing. Like it wasn't the place where William had proposed, where they'd raised their children, where every room held a memory she could reach out and touch." "I'll think about it," Eleanor said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's all I'm asking." Clara's voice softened, became gentle again, loving. "I love you, Mama. I just want what's best for you." "I know, I love you too." When the call ended, Eleanor set the phone down on the table and folded her hands in her lap. She looked at the portrait again. Clara, maybe 9 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, grinning like life was the easiest thing in the world, her arms around her brother, her face pressed against his shoulder, both of them laughing at something William had said just before the camera clicked. They both want the land, Eleanor thought, the realization settling over her like winter. That's all I am now, a signature on a deed, an obstacle between them and money. She thought about all the times she'd gone without, so they could have more. The winter she'd kept the heat low to save money for Michael's college textbooks, the times she'd worn the same coat year after year so Clara could have a new dress for the school dance, the birthday she'd skipped celebrating entirely because Clara had needed money for car repairs, and Eleanor hadn't wanted to ask for anything in return. She'd told herself it was love. That sacrifice was what mothers did, that giving without expectation was the purest form of devotion. But what had it gotten her? 2 children who called when they wanted something, who measured her worth in acreage and property values, who were counting the days until she was gone. She stood slowly, her joints stiff, her body feeling older than it had that morning. She walked to the mantel and picked up the photograph of William, brushing the dust from the glass with her sleeve. His eyes looked back at her, kind and steady, the way they always had. In the picture he was maybe 50, his hair just starting to gray at the temples, his smile slight but genuine. "They don't see me, Will," she whispered. Her voice cracked, broke on his name. "They see what I have, not who I am, not anymore." Maybe they never did. The photograph didn't answer. It never did. but she held it anyway, pressing it against her chest, feeling the sharp edges of the frame dig into her palms, the pain grounding her, reminding her she was still here, still real, even if no one else seemed to notice. She thought about calling them back, confronting them, asking them directly if her suspicions were true. But what would be the point? They'd deny it, they'd be hurt and offended, they'd make her feel guilty for even thinking such things. And maybe, in their minds, they weren't even doing anything wrong. Maybe they'd convinced themselves that caring about the land was the same as caring about her. No, she wouldn't call, she wouldn't confront, she would just leave. The thought came to her fully formed, like it had been waiting there all along. She would leave. Not forever, maybe, just for a while, just long enough to breathe, to think, to remember what it felt like to be seen as something more than an inconvenience or an inheritance. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, the house dark except for the small lamp in the corner casting long shadows across the walls. She thought about her life, the years she'd spent raising her children, the sacrifices she'd made, the love she'd poured into them without ever asking for anything in return. She thought about William, and the quiet evenings they'd spent together, and the way he used to hold her hand when they walked, his thumb rubbing small circles on her palm. She thought about the day Michael was born, how she'd held him for the first time, and felt her entire world shift. The day Clara had taken her first steps, stumbling across the kitchen into Eleanor's waiting arms. The Christmases, the birthdays, the ordinary Tuesdays when nothing special happened but everything felt right. Where had it gone? When had it changed? Or had it always been this way, and she'd just been too blind to see it? By morning, she'd made her decision. She packed a small suitcase, just a few changes of clothes, her journal, the scarf William had given her on their anniversary trip to the lake, soft blue wool that still smelled faintly of his aftershave. She took the photograph of him from the mantel, and wrapped it carefully in a sweater, tucking it into the corner of the suitcase. Then she sat down at the kitchen table, and wrote a note on a piece of lined paper, her handwriting shaky but clear. "I'm safe, I need a little time away, don't worry." She left it there, held down by the sugar bowl, knowing they'd find it eventually, knowing they'd probably be more concerned about the house than about her. Then she put on her coat, picked up her suitcase, and walked out the door. The morning air was cold, sharp against her face. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. She walked down the driveway, past the oak trees, past the mailbox shaped like a bird that William had made in his workshop. She didn't look back. If she looked back, she might change her mind. The bus station was 2 miles away. She walked slowly, her breath visible in the cold morning air, her suitcase heavy in her hand. A few cars passed, their headlights cutting through the dim morning light, but no one stopped, no one asked if she needed help. She was invisible, just another old woman walking alone. When she reached the depot, it was nearly empty, just a tired-looking clerk behind the counter, and a young man sleeping on one of the benches, his backpack under his head. Eleanor approached the counter, and pulled out her wallet. "1 ticket please," she said. The clerk looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and bored. "Where to?" Eleanor opened her mouth, then closed it. She hadn't thought that far ahead. "South," she said finally. "Wherever the next bus is going." The clerk raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. He typed something into his computer, and a ticket printed out. "That'll be $43. Bus leaves in 20 minutes. She paid, took the ticket, and sat down on one of the hard plastic chairs to wait. Around her, the station slowly came to life. A woman with 2 small children, a businessman in a rumpled suit, an elderly couple holding hands, all of them going somewhere, all of them with a purpose, a destination, someone waiting for them. Eleanor had none of that, just a ticket and a suitcase, and the hope that somewhere, out there, she might find something she'd lost. When the bus pulled into the station, she stood, picked up her suitcase, and climbed aboard. She found a seat near the back, by the window, and set her suitcase on the seat beside her. As the bus pulled out of the station, she looked out the window, and watched her town disappear behind her, the church steeple, the water tower, the trees she'd known her whole life, the streets she could walk with her eyes closed, everything she'd ever known, shrinking into the distance. She pressed her hand against the window, her palm flat against the cold glass, and whispered, "Goodbye." And then she turned away, facing forward, toward whatever came next. The bus smelled like diesel and old vinyl, the kind of smell that sticks to your clothes long after you've gotten off. The seats were worn thin, the cushions lumpy and uneven, and every bump in the road sent a jolt through Eleanor's spine. But she didn't mind. The discomfort was real, tangible, something she could focus on besides the hollow ache in her chest. Eleanor sat near the back, by the window, her suitcase on the seat beside her, like a barrier between herself and the rest of the world. The other passengers kept to themselves, a young woman with headphones in, her eyes closed, head bobbing slightly to music Eleanor couldn't hear. A man in a work uniform, sleeping with his head against the glass, his mouth slightly open. An elderly couple 3 rows up, sharing a bag of peanuts, their hands occasionally brushing as they reached in together. No one looked at her. No one asked where she was going. She was grateful for that. The landscape rolled by, fields turning green with early spring, the brown earth showing through in patches where the grass hadn't quite taken hold yet, farmhouses set back from the road, their windows dark or glowing with warm light, towns so small they were just a gas station and a diner, and maybe a post office, there and gone in the space of a breath. She watched it all without really seeing it, her mind somewhere else, somewhere farther back. She thought about the first time Michael had called her mama. He'd been 2, maybe 3, sitting in his high chair with applesauce smeared across his face and in his hair. She'd been cleaning up the kitchen, exhausted from a long day, and he'd looked right at her with those big brown eyes and said it clear as day, "Mama," and her heart had just opened, like a door she didn't know was closed, like the sun breaking through clouds after a storm. She thought about Clara learning to tie her shoes, how she'd sat on the floor for an hour, her little fingers fumbling with the laces, her face scrunched up in concentration. Eleanor had offered to help a dozen times, but Clara had refused. "I can do it, Mama, I can do it by myself," and she had. She'd tied those laces in a lopsided bow, and looked up with such pride that Eleanor had wanted to cry. She thought about William, the way he used to hum while he cooked, old songs from his childhood, that he could never remember the words to, the way he'd kissed the top of her head when he passed her in the hallway, every single time, like it was a rule he'd made for himself, the way he'd held her hand through everything. The births, the illnesses, the arguments that left them both exhausted and sorry, the long quiet evenings when there was nothing to say, and no need to say it. How did I get here, she wondered, her breath fogging the window. How did I become someone my own children don't see? The bus stopped in a small town around midday. The driver announced a 20-minute break, and most of the passengers filed off to stretch their legs, use the restroom, grab something to eat. Eleanor got off too, partly because she needed to move, and partly because staying on the bus felt like admitting she had nowhere to go. The depot was attached to a diner, the kind with red vinyl booths, and a counter lined with stools. Inside it smelled like coffee and bacon grease and something sweet, maybe pie. Eleanor slid onto one of the stools and waited. A waitress appeared, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes and a kind smile, her name tag reading Diane. She poured coffee without asking, sliding the cup across the counter. "Long trip?" she asked, her voice rough from what Eleanor guessed was years of smoking. "I'm not sure yet," Eleanor replied, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. Diane nodded like that made perfect sense, like she'd heard stranger things. "Well, wherever you're headed, I hope you find it." She pulled out her order pad. "You hungry?" Eleanor realized she was. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten, maybe yesterday morning. "Just toast, please. And maybe some eggs." "You got it, honey." While she waited, Eleanor looked around the diner. A trucker sat in one of the booths, reading a newspaper and working his way through a stack of pancakes. A mother and daughter shared a milkshake, the little girl's feet swinging above the floor, not quite reaching. An old man sat alone by the window, stirring his coffee slowly, staring out at the parking lot, like he was waiting for someone who wasn't coming. When her food arrived, Eleanor ate slowly, mechanically. The eggs were cooked well, the toast buttered just right, but everything tasted like nothing.
She forced herself to finish anyway, knowing she needed the strength, even if her body felt like it was running on something other than hunger. "You okay, honey?" Diane was back, the coffee pot in hand. Eleanor looked up, surprised. Yes, I'm fine." Diane studied her for a moment, her eyes knowing. "You don't look fine. You look like someone who's running from something, or looking for something." She refilled Eleanor's cup even though it was still half full. "Either way, be careful. Roads are full of folks who never found what they were looking for." Eleanor managed a small smile. "I'll be careful." They drove through the afternoon, and into the evening. The sun dipped low, turning the sky orange and pink and purple, colors so vivid, they almost hurt to look at. Eleanor watched it all from her window, her forehead pressed against the glass, and felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief exactly, not peace, just space, room to breathe. The other passengers changed as the hours passed. The young woman got off in a town called Riverside. The businessman was replaced by a college student with too many bags. The elderly couple stayed on, now dozing against each other, their heads together, their hands still loosely clasped. Eleanor wondered how long they'd been married. 50 years, 60, she wondered if they still saw each other, really saw each other, or if they'd become like furniture to each other, always there, necessary, but unremarkable. She and William had been married for 48 years when he died, and she'd seen him every day, really seen him, right up until the end. When he got sick, when the cancer ate away at him piece by piece, she'd memorized every line on his face, every gray hair, every spot on his hands. She'd held his hand and looked into his eyes, and tried to pour everything she felt into that gaze, tried to say without words what she couldn't bring herself to say out loud. "Don't leave me, please don't leave me alone." But he had. Not because he wanted to, but because that's what dying is, leaving. And now here she was, 6 years later, leaving too, leaving the house they'd built together, the life they'd shared, the children they'd raised, leaving because staying had become unbearable. The bus stopped again around 8 o'clock, this time in a slightly larger town called Pinewood. More passengers got off than got on. Eleanor stayed in her seat, watching them go, the college student meeting someone at the depot, hugging tight, the trucker climbing into his rig, starting the engine with a rumble, a woman with a baby hurrying toward a waiting car. Everyone had somewhere to go, someone waiting for them. Eleanor had neither. The bus pulled back onto the highway, and the driver's voice crackled over the intercom. "Next stop, Milford, 40 minutes.
Milford. Eleanor turned the name over in her mind. She didn't know anything about it, had never heard of it before. But when the driver said it again, Milford, folks 40 minutes, something in her chest shifted. There, she thought. I'll stop there. She didn't know why. Maybe it was the way the words sounded, soft and unremarkable. Maybe it was exhaustion making the decision for her. Maybe it was just that she had to stop somewhere, and this was as good as anywhere else. When the bus pulled into Milford, it was full dark, the kind of deep darkness you only get in small towns far from city lights. Eleanor gathered her suitcase and stepped off the bus into the cool night air. The depot was small, just a covered bench and a ticket window, closed for the night. Across the street she could see a general store, lights on inside, and next to it a post office, dark. On the corner, a diner with a flickering neon sign that said "Eat." That was it. The rest was just houses scattered along quiet roads, fields stretching out in every direction, darkness so complete she couldn't see where the land ended and the sky began. She walked toward the diner thinking she'd get something to eat, maybe ask about a place to stay. But when she pushed open the door, a bell jingling above her head, the man behind the counter looked up and shook his head. "Kitchen's closed," he said. Not unkindly. "Sorry, we shut down at 8. Oh, Eleanor stood there in the doorway, suddenly unsure. Is there a motel nearby?" He shook his head again, wiping down the counter with a rag. "Not here. Closest one's about 15 miles north, up on Highway 9, you'd need a car." "I see." Her voice came out smaller than she meant it to. "Thank you." Back outside, the street was empty. The general store had turned off its lights while she was in the diner. The air had gotten colder, or maybe she was just noticing it now. She pulled her coat tighter and looked up and down the street trying to figure out what to do next. She could knock on someone's door, ask to use their phone, call, who? Michael, Clara, ask them to come get her, admit she'd made a mistake, go back to being invisible in her own life. No, she'd rather sleep on the street, so she started walking, not toward anything in particular, just walking, down the main road, past the houses with their porch lights on, past the church with its white steeple and the cemetery behind it, the headstones barely visible in the darkness. The air smelled like fresh dirt and something sweet, honeysuckle, maybe, or jasmine. Her feet carried her out of town, onto a road that turned from pavement to gravel. The houses thinned out, then disappeared entirely. There was nothing around her now but fields and darkness and the sound of insects singing in the grass. After a while, she didn't know how long, time had become strange and fluid, her feet began to hurt. Her legs felt heavy, like they were made of something denser than muscle and bone. Her breath came shorter, and the cold had seeped through her coat, through her skin, all the way down to her bones. She stopped by the side of the road and looked around. There was nothing, just fields and darkness and the distant glow of a single porch light far off in the distance, so far it might as well have been on another planet. She thought about sitting down, just for a minute, just to rest. But when she tried, her knees buckled, and she found herself on the ground before she meant to be. The gravel was cold beneath her, sharp against her palms. Just for a minute, she told herself. Just until I catch my breath. She leaned back against her suitcase and pulled her coat around her, tucking her hands into her pockets. The sky above was filled with stars, more stars than she'd seen in years, maybe decades. They stretched from horizon to horizon, a river of light in the darkness. Is this it? She thought. The question came calmly, without panic. Is this how it ends? Alone on the side of a road in a town I don't even know. It seemed fitting, in a way. Poetic, almost. She'd spent her whole life taking care of other people, and now, when she needed care, there was no one. Just stars and darkness and the cold seeping deeper. Her eyes started to close. The exhaustion was overwhelming, pulling her down like an undertow. She tried to fight it, tried to stay awake, but her body had other ideas. William, she thought. I'm sorry, I tried, I really tried. And then through the haze of exhaustion and cold, she heard it, an engine. Headlights swept across the field, growing brighter, closer. A truck slowed, pulled to the side of the road just a few feet from where she sat. A door opened, footsteps on gravel, quick and urgent. Ma'am? A man's voice, deep and careful, tinged with worry. Ma'am, can you hear me? Eleanor's eyes fluttered open. She saw a face, dark skin, concerned eyes, a hand reaching toward her cautiously, like she might spook. Tanya, get over here, the man called over his shoulder, his voice rising with urgency. There's someone, call 911. No, Eleanor's voice came out weak but clear, surprising her. No hospitals, please. The man hesitated, his hand still outstretched. A woman appeared beside him, kneeling down, her hand warm on Eleanor's arm. Okay, the woman said, her voice calm and steady. Okay, no hospitals. But we can't leave you here. It's too cold. Can you stand? Eleanor tried. She really did. She put her hands on the ground and pushed, but her arms were shaking, her legs wouldn't cooperate, and she slumped back against the suitcase. Marcus, help me get her in the truck. Together they lifted her gently, carefully, like she was something fragile and precious. The man, Marcus, took most of her weight, his arm around her back, while the woman, Tanya, held her other side. They half carried her to the truck, their movements slow and deliberate. Inside, the truck was warm, almost shockingly so after the cold of the road. A little girl sat in the back seat, her eyes wide, a blanket clutched in her hands. Is she okay, Mama? The girl whispered, her voice high and frightened. She will be, baby. She will be. Tanya climbed into the back seat and wrapped Eleanor in the blanket, the little girl's blanket. It was soft and worn, smelling like lavender and something sweet, like a child's shampoo. Marcus got back in the driver's seat and started the engine. We're taking you home with us, he said, glancing at Eleanor in the rearview mirror. You can argue later if you want, but right now you need to get warm. Eleanor wanted to protest, wanted to say she was fine, that she didn't need help, that she'd figure something out. But the words wouldn't come. Her throat felt tight, and her eyes were burning, and all she could do was nod. The little girl scooted closer, her small hand finding Eleanor's under the blanket. "Don't worry," she whispered. "Our house is really warm, and Mama makes good soup." Eleanor looked down at the tiny hand holding hers, at the trust in the child's eyes, and something inside her broke open. Not painfully, but tenderly, like ice cracking in the spring. The truck started moving, and through the window, Eleanor saw the stars above, clear and bright and impossibly far away. She closed her eyes and let herself be carried, not knowing where, not caring anymore. Just grateful, in that moment, not to be alone, just grateful to be seen. The Harris home was small, a single-story house with chipped blue paint and a tin roof that rattled when the wind picked up. The porch sagged a little on one side, held up by concrete blocks someone had painted to look like bricks. The mailbox out front was shaped like a rooster, its paint faded but still recognizable, still defiantly red against the weathered wood of the post. Inside, the rooms were narrow but warm, filled with the smell of something baking, cornbread, Eleanor would learn later, and the soft hum of life being lived without pretense. A stack of mail sat on the counter, bills and advertisements, and a postcard from someone's aunt. Shoes were kicked off by the door, small sneakers and work boots lying in a jumbled pile. A drawing was taped to the refrigerator in crayon that said "I love you Mama" in wobbly letters, with a stick figure family standing in front of a house under a smiling sun. They brought Eleanor inside and laid her on the couch, piling blankets over her until she stopped shivering. Not expensive blankets, these were thin and worn, the kind you got from discount stores or thrift shops, but they were clean and soft and smelled like fabric softener and home. Marcus disappeared into the kitchen, and Eleanor heard the sound of a kettle being filled, the click of the stove being turned on. Tanya knelt beside the couch, brushing Eleanor's hair back from her face with hands that were rough from work but gentle in their movements. "You're safe now," Tanya said quietly, her dark eyes steady and kind. "Just rest, we'll figure everything else out later." Eleanor wanted to say thank you, wanted to explain who she was and how she'd ended up on that road, wanted to tell them she wasn't someone who needed rescuing. But the words wouldn't come. Her throat felt tight, swollen with unshed tears and exhaustion, and her eyes were so heavy they might have been weighted down with stones. So she just nodded, and let the warmth of the room and the kindness of these strangers pull her under into a sleep deeper than any she'd had in months. She woke to sunlight streaming through thin white curtains and the sound of a child humming, a tuneless happy sound that spoke of a morning routine, of normalcy, of a life lived without fear or pretense. For a moment Eleanor didn't know where she was. The ceiling was unfamiliar, painted a pale yellow that caught the morning light. The walls were covered with more of those crayon drawings. A calendar from a local feed store, a cross-stitched sampler that said "Bless this home." Then she turned her head and saw the little girl sitting at the kitchen table just a few feet away, her legs swinging above the floor, a piece of toast in one hand and a spoon in the other. She was humming while she ate, completely absorbed in her breakfast, her hair braided neatly down her back with bright pink elastics at the ends. The girl noticed Eleanor was awake and hopped down from her chair immediately, padding over in her socks, mismatched, one with rainbows and one with stars. "Morning, ma'am," she said brightly, her voice clear as a bell. "Mama says you can have some breakfast if you feel good enough." Eleanor blinked, still groggy, her mind struggling to catch up with where she was and what had happened. Yes, thank you," the girl smiled, revealing a gap where one of her front teeth should be. "You were really cold last night. We put you right by the stove to warm you up." She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper, like she was sharing a secret. "I even gave you my blanket, it's my favorite one. It has stars on it, see?" She pointed to the blanket still draped over Eleanor, and sure enough, there were little silver stars stitched into the blue fabric, some of them coming loose from years of washing. Eleanor looked down at the blanket, at the careful stitching, at the worn spots where a child had rubbed her thumb while falling asleep. Something in her chest broke open, not painfully, but tenderly, like ice cracking in the spring, like the first thaw after a long winter. "Thank you," Eleanor said, and her voice came out shaking, unsteady. "That's very kind of you." The girl beamed, her whole face lighting up. "You want some toast? It's got jam. The good kind."
Strawberry. Before Eleanor could answer, the tears came. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet and sudden and impossible to stop. They spilled down her cheeks, hot and unexpected, and she covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with the force of them. The little girl froze, her eyes going wide with worry. "Mama," she called, her voice high and frightened. "Mama, come here." Tanya appeared in the doorway almost immediately, still in her bathrobe, her hair wrapped in a scarf. She crossed the room quickly and sat down on the edge of the couch, her hand resting lightly on Eleanor's shoulder. "It's okay," Tanya said softly, her voice carrying the kind of calm that comes from years of mothering, of soothing hurts both big and small. "You're okay, let it out." But Eleanor couldn't stop. The tears came harder now, pulling up things from deep inside her, the phone call she wasn't supposed to hear, the children who saw her as an inconvenience, the husband who was gone, and the house that felt like a tomb. She cried for the loneliness that had settled so deep inside her. She'd stopped noticing it, the way you stop noticing pain if it's constant enough. She cried for the years she'd spent believing love was enough, that being a good mother would matter, that sacrifice would be remembered and valued. And she cried because a child she didn't know had given her a blanket with stars on it, and that simple act of kindness, that uncomplicated, unreserved generosity, had undone her completely. The little girl climbed onto the couch beside her, carefully, like she was afraid Eleanor might break. She wrapped her small arms around Eleanor's neck and held on tight. "It's okay," she whispered, repeating her mother's words in that way children do, trying to comfort even when they don't fully understand the hurt. "You can have my toast too, it's the best part, I saved it for you." Eleanor pulled her close and held on, this child she'd never met, this stranger who'd offered her warmth without question, without expectation. She held on like she was holding on to something sacred, something precious and fragile, and impossibly generous. Tanya didn't rush her, she just sat there, her hand on Eleanor's back, moving in small circles, the way you comfort a child after a nightmare. After a while the tears slowed, Eleanor's breathing evened out, she loosened her grip on the little girl, who slid off the couch and ran to get a tissue from the bathroom, her footsteps pattering quickly across the floor. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said finally, her voice raw and thick. "I don't usually, don't apologize," Tanya said firmly. "You needed that. We all need that sometimes. No shame in tears." She stood and walked to the kitchen, coming back with a glass of water. "Here, drink this." Eleanor took the glass with shaking hands and drank the cool water, soothing her tight throat. The little girl came back with a wad of tissues and presented them solemnly. "Thank you," Eleanor said, taking them and wiping her eyes. She looked at the child, really looked at her, taking in the gap-toothed smile, the bright eyes, the braids coming slightly loose at the ends. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Lily," the girl said proudly. "Lily Marie Harris. I'm 8 3/4, that's a beautiful name. Mama picked it. She says lilies are strong flowers that grow even when things are hard." Lily climbed back onto the couch, settling in close to Eleanor like they were old friends. "What's your name?" "Eleanor. Eleanor Simmons." "That's pretty too," Lily said generously, kind of old-fashioned but nice, like a grandma name. She paused, then added quickly, "I mean that in a good way. I never had a grandma, they all died before I was born." Marcus appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a dish towel, a grin spreading across his face when he saw Eleanor sitting up. "Well, look at that, you got some color back. How you feeling?" "Better," Eleanor said, and it wasn't entirely a lie. Her body still ached, she was exhausted in a way that went bone deep, but something inside her felt lighter. "Good, real good, 'cause Tanya's making omelets and you don't want to miss those. Best in the county, if I do say so myself." "Which I do," he winked at his daughter. "Right, Lily, right." Lily bounced slightly on the couch, her enthusiasm infectious. "Mama makes the best ones. She puts cheese in them and sometimes peppers and onions and—" all right, Tanya said laughing as she stood. "Don't oversell it. Now go wash your hands, both of you." She pointed at Marcus and Lily, who both groaned good-naturedly but obeyed. 20 minutes later, they were all crowded around the small kitchen table, the four of them elbow to elbow, passing the salt and the hot sauce and fighting over the last piece of toast. It was simple food: eggs scrambled with vegetables, biscuits from a can, sliced tomatoes from someone's garden. But Eleanor couldn't remember the last time something had tasted so good. They talked while they ate, easy conversation that didn't require anything of her. Marcus told a story about the chickens getting out and chasing the mailman down the driveway. Lily interrupted approximately every 30 seconds with her own commentary. Tanya laughed, her head thrown back, her whole body involved in the sound, and Eleanor just sat there, listening, feeling something inside her slowly unclench. Marcus asked her name, but nothing else. No questions about where she was from, why she'd been on that road, what she was running from, or running toward. Tanya offered more coffee but didn't press when Eleanor said she was fine. It was kindness without interrogation, help without judgment. After breakfast, Eleanor insisted on helping with the dishes. Tanya protested at first, but Eleanor was firm in a way she hadn't been firm about anything in years. "I need to do something," she said, her hands already reaching for a plate. "Please." So they stood side by side at the sink, Tanya washing, Eleanor drying, and in the quiet rhythm of it, the clatter of plates, the warm soapy water, the sunlight coming through the window above the sink, something settled inside Eleanor. It was ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of chore she'd done 10,000 times in her own kitchen. But here, in this house, with this woman she didn't know, it felt different. It felt like belonging. "You don't have to tell me anything," Tanya said after a while, her voice low and private, meant just for Eleanor's ears. "But if you need to talk, I'm here. No judgment, just listening." Eleanor was silent for a long moment, drying the same plate over and over, her hands moving automatically while her mind wrestled with whether to speak, what to say, how much to reveal. Then slowly, the words started coming. She told Tanya about the house, about William and the life they'd built together, about the children she'd raised, and the love she'd poured into them like water into a bottomless well. She told her about the phone call, the one she wasn't supposed to hear, and how the world had shifted in that moment, how everything she'd believed had turned out to be built on sand. She told her about leaving, about the bus and the road, and not knowing where she was going, only that she couldn't stay in that house, in that life, waiting for children who only called when they wanted something. Tanya listened without interrupting, her hands moving steadily through the dishes, her face thoughtful, but not pitying. When Eleanor finished, Tanya dried her hands on a towel and turned to face her fully. "You're not alone," she said simply, her eyes meeting Eleanor's with a directness that was startling in its intensity. "Not today, not in this house, you hear me." Eleanor's throat tightened, but she managed to nod. "And for what it's worth," Tanya continued, "I think you're brave. Walking away from something familiar, even when it hurts you, that takes courage. Most people just stay and let themselves get smaller and smaller, until there's nothing left." "I don't feel brave," Eleanor whispered. "No one does," Tanya said. "That's kind of how bravery works." Through the window, they could see Lily in the backyard, chasing chickens with a stick, her laughter carrying on the breeze. Marcus was out there too, fixing something on the chicken coop, his movements steady and unhurried. "We don't have much," Tanya said, following Eleanor's gaze. "But what we have, we share. That's just who we are. So you stay as long as you need. No questions, no expectations, just stay." Eleanor looked at this woman, this stranger, who'd become something more in the space of a single morning, and felt something shift inside her, like a door that had been locked for years finally opening. "Thank you," she said, and the words felt inadequate, too small for what she wanted to express. Tanya just smiled and squeezed her hand. "Come on, let's go sit on the porch. I made sweet tea yesterday, and it's even better on the second day." And so they did. They sat on the sagging porch, in mismatched chairs, drinking sweet tea from mason jars, watching Lily play and Marcus work, and Eleanor felt something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten the name for it. Peace. Days turned into weeks, and then into nearly 2 months, and Eleanor stayed. At first, she told herself it was temporary, just until she figured out what to do next, where to go, how to rebuild a life that had come apart at the seams like an old quilt. But the Harris family didn't treat her like a guest. They didn't tiptoe around her, or speak in careful voices, or act like she was fragile, they just included her, like she'd always been there. Marcus taught her how to feed the chickens, showing her how to scatter the grain in wide arcs so the hens didn't fight over it, how to check for eggs without startling them, how to tell which one was broody, and which one was just being dramatic. They got personalities, he said grinning, as one of the hens, a rust-colored Rhode Island red, pecked aggressively at his boot. That one there, that's Henrietta. She's bossy as hell, excuse my French, and that little brown one hiding behind the coop, that's Pip. She's shy but sweet once she warms up to you. Kind of like people. Eleanor found herself smiling, actually smiling, as she watched the chickens peck and strut around the yard with their jerky self-important movements. There was something soothing about their routine, their simple needs, the way they existed entirely in the present moment, without worry or regret. Tanya let her help with the cooking, and they fell into an easy routine, Eleanor peeling potatoes while Tanya seasoned the chicken, Eleanor stirring the pot while Tanya set the table, Eleanor chopping vegetables while Tanya mixed up cornbread batter. They didn't talk much while they worked, but the silence was comfortable, the kind that didn't need filling, the kind that comes from two people moving in harmony toward a shared goal. And Lily was everywhere. She followed Eleanor around the house, like a small chattering shadow, asking questions about everything that popped into her head. Did you have chickens when you were little? Did you like school? What's your favorite color? Do you know how to braid hair? Can you read cursive? What's the biggest word you know? Do you believe in magic? Eleanor answered each question patiently, finding herself charmed by the child's endless curiosity, her complete lack of self-consciousness. Sometimes Lily would climb into her lap and just sit there, warm and solid, and trusting in a way that made Eleanor's heart ache with something she couldn't quite name. One afternoon, they sat on the porch together, shelling peas into a big metal bowl. Lily's small hands worked carefully, her tongue sticking out slightly in concentration, her fingers stained green from the pods. "Can I ask you something?" Lily said after a while, not looking up from her work. "Of course. Why were you on the road that night? By yourself?" Eleanor paused, a pea pod in her hand, the question hanging in the air between them. She looked out at the fields, at the way the sunlight caught the tops of the grass, turning it golden, at the clouds moving slowly across the sky, like ships on an invisible sea. "I was looking for something," she said quietly. "Did you find it?" Eleanor looked down at the little girl beside her, at her serious brown eyes and her patient hands, and the complete sincerity with which she asked the question, expecting nothing but truth. "I think maybe I did," Eleanor said. Lily smiled, and went back to shelling peas, apparently satisfied with that answer, and Eleanor felt something inside her settle, like a piece of furniture finally finding its place, after years of being in the wrong spot. But kindness, Eleanor was learning, wasn't just about what people gave you, it was about how they gave it, and why. One evening, after Marcus had been laid off from his job at the warehouse, budget cuts, they said, last hired first fired. Eleanor saw the worry settle into his face, saw the way his shoulders sagged when he thought no one was looking, saw the tightness around his eyes at dinner.
She wanted to help. She had a little money saved, not much but enough to make a difference. So late that night, after everyone had gone to bed, she slipped some bills into Tanya's wallet tucked between the folds where it might look like it had always been there, hoping they'd find it and just use it. No questions, no explanations necessary. The next morning Tanya found her in the kitchen before anyone else was awake. "Eleanor," she said, her voice gentle but firm. She held out the money, the bills folded neatly. "We can't take this." "Why not?" Eleanor's voice came out sharper than she meant it to, defensive, almost angry. "You've done so much for me. You saved my life. Let me do something for you, please." Tanya shook her head, her dark eyes kind but unwavering. "If we take your money, then this stops being what it is. It stops being about caring for each other. It starts being about owing, about transactions, about keeping score. And that's not what this is." Eleanor stared at her, the words sinking in slowly, reshaping her understanding of what was happening in this house. "We don't help you because we expect something back," Tanya continued, her voice soft but clear. "We help you because it's right, because you needed help, and we could give it. That's all." That's the whole reason. And if you try to pay us, you turn it into something else, something smaller." Eleanor's throat tightened. She took the money back with shaking hands and nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "I know it's hard," Tanya said, sitting down at the table across from her. "I know you want to feel like you're not taking advantage. But here's the thing, Eleanor, you're not taking anything from us. You're giving us something. You're teaching Lily what kindness looks like. You're helping me with things I don't have time to do alone. You're keeping Marcus company when I'm at work. You're part of this family now, whether you plan to be or not. And family doesn't pay rent." Eleanor felt the tears coming again, but this time she didn't try to hide them. I wanted to earn my place here." "You don't have to earn it," Tanya said firmly. "You already have it, just by being you, just by being here." That night, Eleanor lay awake on the couch staring at the ceiling, Lily's star blanket pulled up to her chin. She thought about the years she'd spent trying to earn love from people who'd already decided she wasn't worth it, who'd measured her value in what she could give them, what she could do for them, how useful she could be. And here in this tiny house with people who had so little, she'd been given more than she'd ever thought to ask for. Not because she'd earned it, not because she deserved it, not because she'd paid for it, or bargained for it, or demonstrated her worth, just because she was human, just because she needed it. She thought about Michael's voice on the phone, about Clara's careful suggestion to sell the house, about all the ways love had been conditional in her life without her fully realizing it, and for the first time she didn't feel the sharp sting of betrayal. She just felt sad for them. Sad for what they'd missed, what they'd never understand, what they'd traded away without realizing its value. Because what the Harris family had given her wasn't something you could buy or inherit or negotiate. It was something you chose every day in the smallest, quietest ways. It was something that existed outside the logic of transactions and fairness and keeping score. And it was worth more than any piece of land ever could be. 2 months passed. Eleanor grew stronger. The hollows in her cheeks filled out, the dark circles under her eyes faded, her laugh came easier and more often. She and Lily spent hours on the porch, reading books from the library in town, making up stories about the chickens, teaching each other silly songs. She and Tanya cooked together, traded recipes written on index cards, talked about everything and nothing, childhoods and dreams and disappointments and hopes. And Marcus would sit with her in the evenings after dinner, playing cards at the kitchen table, or just sitting in companionable silence on the porch, the radio playing softly in the background, old country songs and gospel music, and occasionally something modern that made Lily dance. One warm evening in May, after Lily had gone to bed, Eleanor sat with Marcus and Tanya on the porch, the three of them watching the stars come out, the sky turning from blue to purple to black. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Closer, crickets sang their endless song. "I need to tell you something," Eleanor said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. They waited, not pushing, just present. Tanya's hand found hers in the darkness. "I have children," Eleanor said, the words feeling strange in her mouth, like she was confessing to a crime. "2 of them, grown now with lives of their own. And I thought they loved me, but I was wrong." She told them everything then, the whole story start to finish, nothing held back. The phone call, the conversation she wasn't supposed to hear, Clara's transparent attempt to get her to sell the land, the slow realization that she'd become invisible to the people she'd spent her life serving. When she was done, Tanya's hand tightened around hers. "You weren't wrong about everything," Tanya said softly. "You loved them, that part was real. What they did with that love, how they responded to it, that's on them, not you. You can't control how other people receive your love, you can only control how you give it." Eleanor felt the tears coming again, but this time they didn't hurt as much. They felt almost cleansing, like rain after a long drought. "You know what I think," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair, his feet propped up on the porch railing. "I think family isn't just about blood, it's about who shows up. Who sees you when you're at your worst and doesn't run away? Who stays when things get hard? Who loves you not because they have to, but because they choose to?" Eleanor looked at him, then at Tanya, then through the screen door at the little girl sleeping peacefully inside, her braids spread across the pillow, one arm flung dramatically above her head. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered, her voice breaking, "for seeing me, for choosing me." "Always," Tanya said. "Always." And in that moment, sitting on a sagging porch in a house that wasn't hers, with people she'd known for only 2 months, Eleanor felt something she hadn't felt in years, maybe decades. She felt like she was home. Eleanor knew she couldn't stay forever. The Harris family never said it, never even hinted at it, never made her feel unwelcome or like a burden, but she knew. They had their own life, their own struggles, and she couldn't keep taking from them, no matter how much they insisted she wasn't taking anything at all. One morning in early June, she woke before dawn and sat on the porch, watching the sky turn from black to gray to pale pink, listening to the first birds begin their songs, feeling the cool morning air on her face. The world was waking up, starting fresh, and something in her recognized it was time to do the same. She'd made her decision. After breakfast she found Tanya in the garden, pulling weeds from between the tomato plants that were just starting to set fruit. Eleanor knelt beside her, her knees protesting but obedient, and helped in silence for a while, their hands working in the dark soil. "I need to go back," Eleanor said finally, not looking up from the weeds. Tanya's hands stilled. She didn't look up either. "You sure?" "Yes." Eleanor pulled a dandelion from the dirt, its roots coming up in a long tangled clump. "I need to finish things properly. I need to put my affairs in order, as they say. I need to decide what happens to what I have, and I can't do that while I'm hiding here." Tanya nodded slowly, brushing dirt from her hands. "When?" "Soon. Maybe next week." They worked in silence for a while longer, the sun climbing higher, warming their backs, the smell of earth and growing things all around them. Then Tanya sat back on her heels and looked at Eleanor, really looked at her, her eyes searching. "You know you're always welcome here, right? Anytime. For any reason, this is your home too now, whether you're living in it or not." Eleanor's eyes stung, but she smiled. "I know, and thank you for everything. I don't know what I would have." "Don't," Tanya interrupted gently. "Don't do the what-ifs. You're here, you're okay, that's what matters." That final week of her 2 months passed both too quickly and too slowly. Eleanor tried to memorize everything. The sound of Lily's laughter, the way Marcus hummed while he worked, the smell of Tanya's cooking filling the small house, the feeling of belonging she'd found in the most unexpected place. On her last night they had dinner together, all 4 of them around the table, the windows open, the breeze carrying the scent of honeysuckle and freshly cut grass. Lily talked about her day at school, about the field trip to the science museum, and the butterfly that had landed on her hand. Marcus told a story about the new rooster they'd gotten, who apparently thought he was in charge of everything, including the family. Tanya laughed, her head thrown back, her hand covering her mouth, and Eleanor just sat there soaking it all in, memorizing the sound of their voices, the way the light fell across the table, the warmth of being part of something real. After Lily went to bed, after the dishes were done, and the kitchen cleaned, Eleanor sat with the little girl one last time, perched on the edge of her small bed. "I have something for you," Eleanor said, pulling a small package from her pocket. Lily sat up, eyes wide with curiosity. Inside was a journal, small and leather-bound, with blank pages waiting to be filled. On the first page, Eleanor had written, "For Lily Marie Harris, who taught me that kindness is the bravest thing we can do." "What's this for?" Lily asked, running her fingers over the smooth leather. "For your thoughts," Eleanor said. "For your stories, for all the things you want to remember. When you're older, you can look back and see who you were, what you cared about, what made you happy." Lily threw her arms around Eleanor's neck and held on tight, her small body warm and solid. "I'm going to miss you so much." "I'll miss you too, sweetheart." Eleanor kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood. "But I'll always remember you. Always. You saved my life, you know. Mama and Daddy saved you. I just gave you my blanket." "That's exactly what I mean," Eleanor said softly. The next morning Marcus drove her to the bus station. They didn't talk much on the way there, just listened to the radio, old gospel songs and advertisements for local businesses, and watched the fields roll by, the corn already knee-high, the sky wide and blue and endless. When they pulled up to the depot, Marcus turned off the engine and sat for a moment, his hands resting on the steering wheel, his eyes looking somewhere far away. "You gave us something too, you know," he said quietly. "You showed Lily what grace looks like, what it means to keep going even when things are hard. That's worth more than you think."
Eleanor reached over and squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything, for stopping that night, for taking a chance on a stranger." "You were never a stranger," he said simply. "Not really." He helped her with her suitcase, walked her to the platform, and waited with her until the bus came, its brakes hissing as it pulled to a stop. When it was time to board, he hugged her, a real hug, the kind that said everything words couldn't, the kind that made promises without speaking them. "Take care of yourself, Miss Eleanor. You too, all of you." She boarded the bus and found a seat by the window. As it pulled away, she looked back and saw Marcus still standing there, one hand raised in a wave, growing smaller and smaller until he was just a speck in the distance, then gone. Eleanor turned to face forward, her hands folded in her lap, and let herself cry, quiet tears that fell onto her coat, onto her hands, onto the memories she carried with her. When Eleanor returned home, the house looked smaller than she remembered. The driveway was overgrown with weeds, the porch steps sagging even more than before. The paint was peeling in places she didn't remember. Inside, everything was exactly as she'd left it, the notes still on the kitchen table, curled at the edges now, the dishes in the sink, the silence thick and heavy and oppressive. But she didn't feel the same. She felt clear, purposeful. She knew what she needed to do. She spent the next few weeks putting things in order with a methodical calm that surprised her. She called a lawyer, updated her will, made arrangements. She sorted through decades of belongings, deciding what mattered and what didn't, what held real memory and what just held space. She sold the house and the land, not to Michael or Clara, but to a young couple with a baby on the way, who promised to love it the way she once had, who looked at the kitchen and saw potential, who walked through the rooms and talked about the family they would raise there. Half of the money went to the local children's foundation, anonymous, just as she wanted, with a note specifying it should be used for children whose families were struggling, who needed help but were too proud to ask for it. The other half she put in an envelope addressed to Marcus and Tanya Harris, along with a letter she wrote and rewrote a dozen times, trying to find words adequate for what she wanted to say. "My dear Marcus, Tanya, and Lily, I hope this letter finds you well, and your days continue to be filled with the warmth and love you so freely gave to me. I've thought of you every day since I left, not with sadness but with gratitude so deep I don't have words big enough to hold it. The time I spent with you gave me something I didn't know I was missing, the sense that I could still matter, that I could still be seen, that I could still be part of something real and true. You didn't help me because you expected anything in return. You didn't help me because you thought I deserved it, or because helping me made you look good. You helped me because it was right, because I needed help, and you could give it. That simple, that pure. And that, more than anything else in my 74 years, restored my faith in this world. Restored my faith that kindness still exists, that love doesn't have to come with conditions attached like invisible strings. That sometimes the truest family is the one that finds us when we've forgotten we're worth finding. Enclosed is a gift, it's not payment. Please hear me on this. You can't pay someone for saving your life, for giving you back yourself, for teaching you what love actually looks like. This is simply what I want to do with what I have. Use it for Lily's education, for the house, for anything you need or want. No strings, no expectations, just gratitude. Thank you for showing me what it means to be truly kind. Thank you for choosing to see me when I'd become invisible everywhere else. With all my love, Eleanor." She mailed it on a Tuesday afternoon, then went home and sat in her mostly empty house, surrounded by boxes labeled "Donate" and "Keep," and felt at peace for the first time in longer than she could remember. When Eleanor passed away 8 months later, it was quiet and peaceful, surrounded by nurses at the hospice facility who held her hand and spoke to her gently, who treated her with the kind of dignity she'd learned to recognize and value. She wasn't in pain, she wasn't afraid. She'd made her peace, said her goodbyes in her own way, left her mark in the small quiet ways that mattered. She was ready. Her headstone was simple, chosen by the lawyer who'd handled her affairs according to instructions she'd left in an envelope marked, "When I'm gone, Eleanor Simmons 1950 to 2025, she found peace and kindness." 1 year after Eleanor's death, the Harris family used the money she'd left them, every cent of it, to start a small fund for elderly people in need. They called it Eleanor's Light, and they ran it out of a corner of the community center in town, meeting once a week to sort through applications, pack care packages, make phone calls to check on people who lived alone. It wasn't much, just enough to help with groceries, or utility bills, or a warm coat in winter, or medicine that wasn't covered by insurance. But it was something, and it grew, slowly but steadily, as word spread and others began to contribute, as people who'd been helped donated what they could when they could, as the cycle of kindness Eleanor had been pulled into continued to spin outward, touching people she would never meet, never know. Lily, now 11 years old and serious about her role in the foundation, helped her parents run it. She wrote thank you notes to donors in her careful handwriting, helped pack care packages with canned goods and blankets and personal care items, and every year on Eleanor's birthday, she left flowers at her grave, whatever was blooming, whatever was beautiful. One afternoon in late summer, Clara was cleaning out her own attic when she came across a box of her mother's things items she'd taken from the house before it was sold, meaning to sort through them later, but never quite finding the time. At the bottom, beneath old photo albums and recipe cards and Eleanor's wedding dress wrapped in tissue paper, she found a newspaper clipping, carefully cut out and folded. It was an article about Eleanor's Light, published in the local paper. There was a photo, Tanya and Lily standing in front of the community center, smiling, holding a banner that read Eleanor's Light, in memory of a woman who believed in kindness. The article described the foundation, its mission, its impact. And it mentioned Eleanor Simmons, who had funded it in gratitude to a family who showed her what love truly looks like. Clara sat on the dusty attic floor, the clipping in her hands, and read it 3 times. She stared at the photo, at this child she'd never met, at this family her mother had apparently lived with, at the smile on Lily's face that spoke of genuine affection, of real connection. She thought about her mother, about the last time they'd spoken, about the things she'd said, and the things she'd left unsaid, about the conversation that had seemed so reasonable at the time, selling the land, her mother moving to the city, practical solutions to practical problems. And for the first time, she understood what she'd lost, not the land, not the money, but the woman who'd loved her unconditionally, who'd given everything without keeping score, who'd spent her last months with strangers who'd seen her more clearly in 2 months than Clara had seen her in years. Clara folded the newspaper clipping carefully and set it on the floor beside her. Then she sat there in the quiet attic, surrounded by dust and memory and regret, and cried, not for what she'd lost, because you can't really lose what you never valued, but for what she'd never truly seen until it was too late. On the 1-year anniversary of Eleanor's death, the Harris family held a small memorial service at the community center. Maybe 40 people came, neighbors, people who'd been helped by the foundation, the staff from the hospice where Eleanor had spent her final days, a few elderly people who'd known her from the seniors center she'd attended briefly before she got too sick. Tanya stood at the front of the room, Lily beside her holding a photo of Eleanor, one they'd taken that last summer, Eleanor sitting on their porch, eyes bright, truly smiling, looking happier than she'd probably looked in years. Eleanor Simmons taught us something important, Tanya said, her voice steady but soft, carrying to every corner of the quiet room. She taught us that kindness doesn't have to be big or loud or expensive, it just has to be real. It has to come from a place of genuinely seeing someone, genuinely caring, genuinely believing that every person has value just because they're human. She paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd, young and old, black and white, people who'd known Eleanor, and people who only knew of her through what she'd left behind. She taught us that we can't always choose our family, Tanya continued. We don't get to pick who we're born to, who shares our blood, who's connected to us by law or tradition, but we can choose who we love. We can choose to show up for each other, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. We can choose to see people when everyone else has looked away. Lily stepped forward, holding the photo carefully. Miss Eleanor said that sometimes people just need to know they matter. That's all, just that they're seen and they matter, and someone cares that they're still here. Her voice was clear, confident in the way children's voices are when they're speaking a truth they fully believe. She mattered to us, and we want to help other people feel like they matter too. That's what Eleanor's Light is for. After the service, people lingered, eating cookies, drinking coffee, sharing stories about Eleanor, or about loneliness, or about the times they'd felt invisible, and someone had finally seen them. Marcus stood by the door, greeting people, shaking hands, his arm around Tanya's waist. An elderly woman approached them, her hands shaking slightly as she held out an envelope. "I'd like to donate," she said quietly. "Not much, but Eleanor's story reminded me of my own mother. She was alone at the end too. I wish someone had been there for her the way you were there for Eleanor." Tanya took the envelope gently, then pulled the woman into a hug. "Thank you, this will help someone. I promise you that." Outside, Lily stood by the memorial poster they'd set up. Photos of Eleanor, information about the foundation, quotes about kindness and community. She traced her finger over one of the photos, Eleanor and Lily sitting on the porch shelling peas, both of them laughing at something. "She's still with us, isn't she?" Lily said when her mother came to stand beside her. Tanya looked at the photo, at her daughter's serious face, at the people inside still talking and laughing and sharing and connecting, all because one lonely woman had found her way to their door on a cold night. "Always, baby," she said, pulling Lily close. "Always, that's how love works. It doesn't die when people do, it just keeps going, moving from person to person, growing bigger every time someone chooses to pass it on." Lily leaned against her mother and smiled, looking up at the evening sky where the first stars were beginning to appear, and whispered, "Thank you, Miss Eleanor." And somewhere in the quiet space between memory and hope, between what was and what would be, Eleanor Simmons smiled back. Because she'd learned, in those last months of her life, the most important truth of all, that love given freely, without condition or expectation, never really ends. It just transforms, spreading outward like light, touching people she would never meet, changing lives she would never know about, proving over and over again that kindness, real, honest, unconditional kindness, was the most powerful force in the world. And that sometimes, the greatest gift we can give or receive is simply this: to see and be seen, to matter and to know we matter, to love and be loved, not because we've earned it or deserve it, or paid for it, but simply because we're human, and that in the end is enough.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.